I haven't done a report on the trust in a long time. The trust, the committee's been kind of out and about for a while, I think. Just so you know.
Well, they're in now, because Jenny.
Right. Trust has been around for a long time. There was a big emphasis of adding to the trust, gosh, 20 years ago, and that's kind of dropped off over the last decade, I would say. But give you an update, the trust is, as of yesterday, is at a little over $221,000.
Very nice.
It's invested in what I would call, I like to keep it simple, what I call a 65-mile-an-hour portfolio, and that's what the committee decided on many, many years ago. And what I mean by that is about 65% of it's invested in great companies all over the world, very diversified. And then 35% would be on fixed income, and that's your cushion for down markets, except for this year. This is a year that is totally different than anything that's happened in a long, long time. So the fixed income market and the equity market are down because of what the Fed is doing to fight inflation, and there's just too much money in the money supply that was built up over the last 2.5 years because of COVID. The trust makes a distribution, and Jake McClendon comes up with that calculation every year. He has to do some kind of average, and it's roughly about 5%. I think it used to be a little bit lower than that, because without putting any contributions in, I can tell you long-term a 5% distribution rate puts you at some point when we'll all be gone, it may go away. But we may have to look at that, because it was a 4% at one time. If we're not making contributions to it, eventually, if there gets some down years and we are making distributions, we could see it fall. Last year, there was, let me look at my notes here. I have a detail. There was a little over 18,000 that was distributed last year, and that was done in April of this year. The year ends on June 30th, so there was 15,100 that went out in April of this year, and then another 3,000 that went out in June. So the one thing I would emphasize is to make contributions to the trust, because there hasn't been much. I've got an activity log since 2014. There have been just very few people that are making contributions to the trust. Stan.
Is there some means by which we could get the online portal for the trust up, or is there one?
That is a good question, and
I didn't hear that.
he was asking about getting an online portal for the trust. Is that through Rotary?
Actually, it's through Payment Factory, or Pay Factory, I guess it is, and that's how Pay Merchant and Pay Factory is the parent, I guess, company. But yeah, that's what we got for paying dues and doing donations and buying tickets and stuff for fundraisers and whatnot.
Just off the top of my head, I would say that would be better. There's an account at Mabry Bank. That would be better to go through them.
Probably, okay. I didn't.
And
So
then we could always move it into Mr. Jones for that, because that could create issues, I think.
Probably so.
The trust used to have, I think when I first started in the club, it was like $50,000 or something. That's 26 years ago. So we've done a lot of good with it, and it's grown over the years. This year is the exception, but hopefully it'll be better before the end of the year. I'm sure everybody's feeling it on their other individual accounts. Yeah. Any questions?
What were their earnings this year?
There are no earnings this year, Bill. This year, we started the year in 2021, January of 2021 at 281,000 in the trust. We've taken out about 20, probably 25,000 roughly over that time frame, and we're at 221. So it's been a rough year.
How often do you rebalance your ratio?
The question is, how often does it rebalance? We look at the account every week. If it drifts off our risk, that 65 mile an hour portfolio, it has to be off by a certain percentage. If it's off by that certain percentage in 1 week, we mark it as 1 week out of balance. The second week, when it comes around, if it's still out of balance, we will rebalance the portfolio back to that risk. So it's constantly being looked at. So it's not on a quarterly basis or an annual basis. It's every week it's looked to see if it needs to be rebalanced. Good question.
So in the past, how has the trust been getting funds? Just individual donors, or has there been fundraisers set aside for it?
I know there's been individual donors. And Tim Roberts, who I don't know if Tim is still a member or not.
No.
He was very knowledgeable about the ins and outs of the actual trust and what had to happen. I'm more knowledgeable on the investment side of it. I vaguely remember that there may have been a golf tournament or something that was, the proceeds would go into the trust.
Okay.
But sometimes those didn't go into the trust, they went to the club, and there was some debate about that, whether it was properly treated correctly. And that was several years ago.
Well, it does bring up a good question, because in the old days, when we had 100 members, we charged a lot more dues than we do now, and we had a lot more members paying those dues. So that kept our operating funds pretty healthy. And so when you have a fundraiser, like the galas that we used to have, or the golf tournaments, it was easier to put some of that money into the trust because we don't need it for operating. With COVID and everything, we haven't done any fundraisers in several years. So not only is our operating's going down as well, because we haven't been putting money into it, and we don't pay as many dues, and we don't have the membership. So just to make everybody aware, that's, we have the operating fund and we have the trust, and we'd love for everybody to contribute to both. And that's where a fundraiser, the first one we've done on any scale, we hope, is the Southwood fundraiser. And that's where we are just leaving it, depending on how much we may put some in the, we've talked about putting some into operating, and some, if we have enough, we can put it into the trust. So
Yeah. And I wondered about our little ticket sales. Does that go in general? That we sell every week?
everything will go into the checking account, so to speak. But then it's up to us to decide whether to transfer any of it.
And-
Nothing goes directly into those trust accounts.
Well, there's a separation, there's a trust committee, and then there's the club, and they're supposed to be separate.
Right.
But you can make a contribution to the trust.
You
Yes.
can make a
Make a
contribution.
contribution to the
Yeah.
trust. It's obvious that we're gonna have to push on that, because if you don't, it's gonna run out.
Yep.
Well, someday.
Yeah, we won't have any scholarships or anything else.
Thank you.
Any other questions? The amount that will be determined to distribute for this year, I talked to Jake McClendon about it, and he said there's some type of averaging that he has to do, and I don't, for tax purposes, on the tax return, I don't understand what that is, but he'll come up with the number, Jenny, and get it with you.
That's like an R&D, not the
Yes,
trust.
yes.
Okay.
I think it was, like I said, I think it was different in the past, and I don't,
Yeah, Jake's the one that told us that when he started doing those tax returns again, he told us it had to be 5%, not 4%, as we're in we thought, so that's
We
why he
just
says we
revised
had to
the
do 5%.
bylaws, and it says 5%.
5%. Okay. But I just, as a financial person, if you take a 5% distribution rate long-term, you're gonna run out of money, and it may be 50 years from now, but it will go down and probably run out, unless we have a huge, it's called sequencings of returns. If you have 10 years of straight great markets, then that may never happen, but at some point it will.
I think it was the IRS that said we had to do 5%.
When Jake got
We did.
We're good, Stan?
We're good.